24 years after 9/11, the New York Department of Motor Vehicles is removing what they concede is a, quote, highly inappropriate license plate that had been issued. And what an understatement that is. Jihad 123 read the license plate, and it would not have been removed if a tipster would not have sent it to the South Shore Press. Was this a sick joke or a credible threat and warning to the people of Long Island? So many questions with this. Joining us now with this exclusive is Stefan Mychajliw of the South Shore Press. Stefan, so great to have you on. Was this a joke or was this a serious tag?
Well, thank you for having me. At first, we thought it was a sick joke. When South Shore Press reporter Deborah Williams first got the tip in the photo, we couldn't believe it. At first, I thought, okay, there's no way this plate is real. There's no way that Jihad 123 would get past the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles and get through and actually on a license plate. But sure enough, it did. And they confirmed it. It was legit. It was real. It was not a made-up vanity plate that someone just kind of drew on their own. It was an actual license plate issued by the state of New York.
So this raises, I guess, a topic that we don't often think of. I remember years ago, I followed this Instagram account, Instagram or X. It was just a funny account that followed all of these vanity plates across the country, and people would submit really funny ones from across the nation. But even more funny was the list of license plates that did not make it through, did not get through the Department of Motor Vehicles, I guess, sensors or filters. In the process of uncovering this story, have you learned more about how the New York DMV processes these vanity plates and how they filter them through?
Yeah, a lot more than we ever imagined at the South Shore Press, yes. And that's why that's such a great question, because we literally had to figure out, okay, is someone pulling our leg? Is this a phony vanity plate that someone just drew it on? And sure enough, we went through numerous questions and conversations with the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles, and they in fact confirmed, yes, for lack of a better phrase, a puck got past the goalie, and they issued that plate. And if you go to the Google machine, New York State Department of Motor Vehicles, vanity plate, request a plate, there are incredibly strict guidelines on how they determine whether or not to issue someone a license plate. And to their credit,
okay, so lay out some of those. What are those restrictions? Just a sampling. What are some of those restrictions?
Yeah, the biggest one, according to the New York State DMV, is that they will never issue a plate that basically supports or promotes violence, hatred. Those are the two big ones. But obviously, jihad is an incredibly offensive term to so many around the globe, literally used by terrorists to justify the destruction of Israel, to basically kill Jews. And that plate, some way, somehow, got past the very strict restrictions with the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles. But the two biggest ones they list are anything that basically supports violence or that's hateful towards a group. And jihad is the definition of that. And they admitted it never should have been issued.
Interesting. So, again, this goes back to kind of the basic process. I guess there's just a human being who goes through these applications and either puts an acceptance or a rejection stamp on some of these vanity plate applications. But then it doesn't just go through them. It goes through several other hands after that. And clearly, this wasn't just a mistake from one person. Several people had to have touched this thing and let it go through. And that's where the story also gets interesting. There seems to be a climate in New York that seems okay with this.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of the individuals the South Shore Press interviewed, including prominent members of the Jewish community, were saying, well, wait a minute, maybe this should be passed on to law enforcement or the FBI for two reasons. Number one, someone asked for a plate that said jihad on it and drove around New York State with that. But then the other issue is, how did it get past their screenings? There are numerous technological barriers that should have been weeding out plates that are requested by people to the New York State DMV. And you make such a good point. Okay, let's just say something gets past that. Well, there had to be a clerk at the counter. There had to be someone that basically pulled that plate off of a machine. There had to be a DMV clerk that took that plate, looked at it, and then physically handed it to the person who then, of course, put it on their vehicle. So there are numerous failings within the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles that allowed a Jihad 123 plate to be on the road.
And just as again, to illustrate an example, they don't allow words like Nazis, and there's a whole list of things that you're not allowed to put on a license plate. And it's not just a New York thing. I think every state has different rules or variations, but generally it's pretty systemic. It's pretty comprehensive, isn't it?
It's incredibly comprehensive. And again, I just listed the top 2 restrictions for New York State, that basically anything that supports violence or anything that could be perceived as hateful towards a group like Israel, like the Jews. I'm Catholic. Things of that nature, race, sexual orientation. Like if you go to the Google machine and say, I want to apply for a plate within the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles, and then it takes you to their vanity plate section where you can actually punch in whatever plate you want, submit it, and they'll tell you whether the plate is available or it's just not. I mean, their list of restrictions is very thorough. It's long. It's incredible at what they list.
Well, do we have any insight as to who's attached to that plate?
We don't. That's the one thing the DMV would not do, is release the specific plate owners. So, again, I worked in government. I was the taxpayers watchdog as the Erie County Controller, for 9 years before I went on to serve as spokesman for Vivek Ramaswamy and now the news director of the South Shore Press. I worked in government for quite some time. I wholeheartedly understand the process, that they did not want to list who that person was. But the DMV of New York State did admit, yes, it was a mistake. They issued the plate. It never should have gone through.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation.